Peace, kings, peace, queens. Back again with another chapter, chapter 7 of The Road from Orion. Rationalists wearing square hats think in square rooms, looking at the floor, looking at the ceiling. They confine themselves to right-angled triangles. If they tired rhomboids, cones, waving lines, ellipses, as for example, the ellipsis of the half moon, rationalists would wear sombreros. Six significant landscapes, Wallace Stevens. We immediately followed Lucia outside. She made herself comfortable on a chaise lounge next to the pool, as did John, but I was still weary of being in direct sunlight, so I sat opposite them under the shaded security of the deck table's ostrich-feathered umbrella. Within minutes, Lucia gave us a clear explanation of her rationale. Apparently, her grandfather's legacy of questing for Egyptian wisdom, along with the gift of the box, inspired Lucia to unearth the meaning of the ancient Egyptian funerary texts. For years, she studied the Old Kingdom pyramid texts and the Middle Kingdom coffin texts, finding the same themes present in both, even though some scholars thought they were not unified. She organized a similar theme in these texts into a matrix of 108 idea strands, noticing that the Egyptians had identified an actual path to eternity through the cosmos. Lucia then mapped the path, which she verified by studying space physics, a young promising science. Comparing this data with her chemistry and physics knowledge, she was able to see remarkable similarities between cosmic and quantum events, which prompted her to read all the books of the dead. From this, she broke down the meaning of the interrelated Egyptian religious symbols into a scientific code that explained the genetics of the pathway and the nature of the dead person's afterlife transformation. She claimed that her role had restored meaning to the long-lost signs found in myth, religion, and psychology. Now, all she needed was confirmation, proof from history's great thinkers and writers, and their works indicated in some way the hidden Egyptian science her code revealed. This would be additional proof, and she correctly interpreted the Egyptian sign. She needed to catalog what philosophers thought about ultimate reality, what great writers and mythologists thought about mathematicians, physicists, for she believed that all had pieces of the puzzle. Like her grandfather, she was questing for an understanding of the deepest meaning of life, the elusive vision of wholeness on which everything revolves. She believed that it was a culture's insane separation of the sciences and arts into different specializations that stopped us from seeing the whole and unburying the deep core knowledge. This is what attracted her to John, a literature major well studied in the best minds of the last 3,000 years. She needed his input to prove her theory on the ancient funerary text, for if she had uncovered the original meaning intended by Egyptians, then these ideas would be threaded through literature. The same theme would be repeated in works cultures cherished as great art. And this is why Lucia invited John to her Arizona home. She planned to test her thesis by dredging John's mind with his knowledge after he ingested the white powder. For Lucia imagined the magical stimulant had the power to explain the all by penetrating into the core of matter, the dark heart and that harbored the creative artist's unconscious intention. As I said before, I was just along for the ride. After learning this much, we still sense Lucia was not telling us everything, such as the true chemical potential of the white powder, but she soon promised that we would ultimately know this secret and more after we understood the written evidence left by the world's greatest intellects. In time, she vowed we would discover how all this linked directly with her sabbatical project regarding the cloning experiment and the path to the stars and eternity. Despite this breakthrough regarding her motives, we were still uncomfortable about the idea of ingesting the gold. I called it gold because that is what it was to Lucia, not real gold, but although there was some in it, but gold in the sense that it was the means that she needed to access the higher spiritual knowledge, the all. Both John and I were making a concerted effort to understand her logic, and as the afternoon passed, our conversation centered on a creative inspiration and where it came from. The philosopher Martin Heidegger believed thoughts come to us, said John tentatively. We don't create them. They come to us. The conversation stopped at the point while we were all thought of apologies. The conversation stopped at that point while we all thought about what this meant. John had time to walk over to the bar next to the lab, find one of the remaining cores, open it, and drink half. The thought sender must be some crazy stand-up comedian, I mused, especially when you imagine the thoughts of every human in the world. Certainly only a comic or a sadist would design the thinking of a child, a madman, a tyrant, or a scientist like Lucia. I watched her closely as she stood up, stretched seductively, and plopped her straw sombrero on John's head. John quickly drew her hat back to her, which made her laugh like a young innocent girl, and for a moment her eyes lost the haunted look. But the look came back within seconds. Heidegger's intuition is very disturbing, she finally commented, for it suggests that we don't think for ourselves. We're puppets on a stage. We're shadows on the walls of our cave. Lucia wasn't naive. She sensed that Heidegger must be right. Our intelligence could be enslaved by some designer some evil genius who creates our thoughts first, then sends them to us. It was an interesting idea, a reasoning system we had no control over, and I could see the spontaneity of the idea appealed to John, who often made sense of reason but preferred imagination. Still, I knew he had experienced moments when he thought he could free his mind from reason, but was afraid to do it for fear of losing his sanity or being labeled as a psychologist. Remembering more of Heidegger's ideas, John said, the thoughts that come from deep within the conscious urge a person to live up to their full potential. Most people ignore these calls from the source of thought. But Heidegger said that those who think and create with words are tapping into the actual source or house of being. He glanced at me, then focused on Lucia, who was smiling, her sharp intuition making her careless. Heidegger, John continued, believed that freedom could be found through imagination, what he called the original revelation of nothing. He said There is a light center, a passage for a human to reach his full potential. And most people ignore these calls from the source of thought. But Heidegger said that those who think and create with words are sorry guys. Let me redo my place. He glanced at me, then focused on Lucia, who was smiling, her sharp intuition making her careless. Heidegger, John continued, believed that freedom could be found through imagination, what he called the original revelation of nothing. He said that there is a light center, a passage for a human to reach his full potential, and a mystery with some concealed danger. He paused. All of this requires a loss of reason. Why not add death and transfiguration to the list, I thought, looking hard at John, and then I realized that in a clever way, Lucia was convincing him to experiment with the powder. And to be honest, John did not need a lot of persuasion because he enjoyed the mind expanding power of certain drugs, for he was always reaching for the sky. Even so, I was more interested in the process of thought and its source rather than the white powder. So I considered that if thoughts are sent to us, then cause and effect, deduction, and the scientific method may not be valid. We may be receiving only parts of the transmission, losing or not remembering the whole message. For even though reason allows us to put these parts in neat little packages, it may not be the whole package, the complete thought. Momentarily distracted, I watched Lucia pick up a yellow beach ball and sit back down on the lounge. She was spinning the ball on her lap, and I avoided looking at her so I could keep thinking. What worried me most about this idea of thoughts coming to us was that it could be true. Modern brain research confirms that our brain is a receiving organ. On the other hand, psychologists treat schizophrenics every day who suffer from the delusion that some other is inserting thoughts into their mind. Brain messages, mental disease, thought insertion, all this trivia was running through my mind when I realized the sun's progress across the desert of blue sky had placed me directly into its gory red glow. I moved quickly back into the shade of the umbrella, checking my hands to see if they were yellow, but only my mind was yellow, for the thought of the pulsing sun kept coming back to me like a bad reflex, and I had to admit that I was now afraid of the sun. More thoughts fired through my mind as I considered a clinical psychologist could easily diagnose me with the flight of ideas or label me a paranoid schizophrenic. And then I thought arrived telling me that there was a positive side to thought insertion. Yes, every writer looks for the opportunity. Theodore Rokoff, who, by the way, went to the University of Michigan and then Harvard as a graduate student, received his poem, In the Mind's Eye, from some other, and he said the poem virtually wrote itself on a summer day in 1958. For Rokoff, as for many writers, the process of going deep into the mind was dangerous, but after 3 breakdowns, the poet still did not care about the dangers since he believed that madness was a sign of a noble soul. Rokoff wanted to know the great mystery of life like Lucia and John, and the mysteries could be unveiled at the edge, the brink of the cliff where madness threatens sanity, where chaos overwhelms orders, and where meaning assaults language. But still, one must consider what happens to Gerard Nerval, the French writer who could eat ice cream out of skulls and hold literary seminars in the nude. The surrealist who would walk a lobster on a pale blue ribbon through a palace royal gardens. Nerval's imagination was his infinite delight, while reason was the loss of his happiness. He believed his dreams were a second life and could reveal the meaning of life. Considering this, I could not help to think The dreams originated from the same source as thought, for they were just as fleeting, and Nerval must have thought this too, for he attempted to fix his dream state, and he did. Black magic made him hang himself from an apron string, what he called the Queen of Sheba's garter. But was it just black magic that suicided him? Or was it the torment of his spiritual quest that offered him an answer to questions, an answer that could be only discovered through death? Whatever the circumstances, it was obvious that thought insertion could be dangerous. At that point, I tried to stop my thinking, but Heidegger's idea kept arriving in my mind, taunting me with possibility, plaguing me until I followed the thoughts to the grim conclusion. Thoughts come to us. Then some other may have been driving Nerval mad by playing his mind, making him think he could discover the secret of life. The same other could be also motivating Lucia, who really did not know how much of the powder a human body could take or its long-term effects. Faced with this knowledge, I could only console myself with the idea that Lucia was sane, even though she was playing with our minds, just like she was playing with that ball. At that moment, Lucia threw the beach ball at John, making a statement that went through the hoop of his mind and into the turquoise pool that now rippled with blue crystals. Our scientists have also received thought insertions. The German chemist Friedrich August Kakel came up with the molecular benzene ring structure after a dream about a snake biting its tail. She continued triumphantly. Einstein imagined himself riding a light beam when he came up with E=mc². When she mentioned Einstein, she scored. John respected Einstein. Laughing, he stood up and dove into the pool after the ball, disappearing into the sapphire waters which splashed on the deck. Slowly surfacing, he swam to the other side of the pool like a suntanned idiot boy, grabbed the beach ball and spit water from his mouth. He said, "The joke is on us. We don't possess our minds, even though we reason as if we do." He paused. "Our reasoning comes from some alien mind." Lucia reinforced his brainstorm. It follows we must learn to think differently. We must learn to see, to be seers. Hearing this, John sank leisurely under the water, the same way Ahab did when his corpse was lashed to the cross of Moby Dick. And then another thought arrived at the mind's door. What idea are we stuck on that is stopping us from thinking differently? The poet Shelley believed it was our idea of God that was confusing us, that the explanations of religion, legend, mystic, and saints have attempted to explain it, but have missed the point. As an idealist, Shelley wanted to overthrow the church, private property, and the monarchy. As an escapist, he sailed his small boat into the Mediterranean Sea, aware that a storm was coming and he could not swim. At age 29, he must have wanted to drown, and he did. Like Shelley, Nerval believed that we have misinterpreted the secret of life, but still, there must be another way of discovering the secret other than suicide. After all, the human imagination is free, unreasonable, and inexhaustible. Anything is possible, and it does not have to be proved. A wordless intuition can nail the Joker to his coffin, so to speak. Sounds crazy, but many of our great writers and thinkers suffered breakdowns or were diagnosed manic, depressed, or mad by the standards of reason. Perhaps by using their imagination, their visionaries were struggling to free themselves from the trap of an alien reason, a universal thought controlling other than that sends out thoughts. Thinking this, I suddenly felt free, albeit close to madness, for if Lucia were right, her code would decipher the mystery of the other, enlighten enlightened, rather. I no longer feared the power of the white powder. Like John, I was beginning to see that Lucia's goal might lead us to knowledge that could explain the idea of God and eliminate the fear of death. All right, once again, we've come to an end of chapter 7. And y'all bear with me. I, messed up on a few words as I always do, but bear with me through it. I appreciate y'all. Peace, kings, peace, queens. I'll holler at y'all later.